you ready?
Yeah.
Yes!
This is the Ross Kaminsky Show.
You're a great American.
He's a great guy.
Now, Ross Kaminsky on Denver's talk station, 630 KHAL.
Hey, good morning. I'm Ross. Thank you so much for starting your day with me. I appreciate it. It's Wednesday already. This week is going quickly. Less than 2 weeks until the presidential election. That is remarkable, isn't it? Less than 2 weeks. Now, of course, Election Day, as we mentioned the past couple of days, Election Day means a little less than it used to in the sense that so many states have so many more people voting early and voting by mail and or absentee, that kind of thing. Here in Colorado, actually, I'll go find the data and I'll let you know what the numbers look like in Colorado. I guess as of Monday night will be the latest data that we have. Let's see. I'll do a little Google search. Colorado Secretary of State election data. I'll see if I can find it for you real quick. But yeah, it's a wacky year, and tomorrow night is the second and final presidential debate, and there is a lot at stake. And I'll tell you what, if I were a betting man, in the debate, and let me just make, based on my understanding of how this thing will work, is that for each initial question, each candidate will get 2 minutes, and then there will be some rebuttal, back and forth time, that sort of thing. And the mute button will automatically be on during that 2-minute part only, where only the person who is supposed to be speaking will be speaking at that time. So I think that's fine. I really think the best thing would be if they muted both candidates all the time for the entire debate and then had them each mime their answers. That would be really, really good. Although when I said that on Twitter last night, Mandy Connell said she would prefer to see it done via interpretive dance rather than mime. And that's a pretty good call. But wouldn't you love to see President Trump doing the mime stuck in a glass box thing? I think that would be awesome, and I think he would do a much better job than Joe Biden would. And I'm being a little bit serious here in the sense that if they go with the topics that Kristen Welker has picked, we talked about this briefly yesterday, a bunch of topics that were mostly covered in the first debate, I think this thing is going to be quite uninformative and maybe boring. I think what people are looking for is to see whether President Trump calls Joe Biden the big guy during the debate, coming out of one of these Hunter Biden emails that talks about holding some stock, Hunter holding some stock, quote, for the big guy, as part of a relationship that Hunter Biden was trying to develop and weasel his way into a multi-million-dollar consulting contract that he had no qualifications for, with some Chinese big shots, which means people tied to the Chinese government, because anybody who is rich and powerful in China in business, even if they are not officially part of government, are unofficially part of government, because that's how their system works. Anyway, that's tomorrow night. We'll see what happens. And on Friday morning, we're going to recap the debate. Of course, I'll do some myself, and we're going to have a couple of really interesting guests. I suppose I'm teasing 2 days ahead here, but on Friday morning, a couple of the guests for recap. One will be from FreedomWorks, Director of Policy for FreedomWorks. It'll be really good. And you may have seen him on TV a fair bit, especially if you watch Fox News. Tom Bevan, who is the co-founder of Real Clear Politics, is going to join me on Friday morning. And I like this guy a lot. It's actually quite hard to tell what his own personal political leanings are. He just really understands the stuff really well, and it's going to be excellent. Gosh, it's much too hard to find Colorado's data on how many ballots have been turned in so far. I guess there must be another way for me to find this, or maybe Shannon can find it. But it should be right there at the top of the website, shouldn't it? Let me just check one other thing. So there was an interesting court decision yesterday, and there have been a few cases along these lines, most of which have gone Governor Polis's way and the state of Colorado's way. This one was a little different. You may recall that there are regulations that have been put, based on coronavirus, been put on religious services here in Colorado. And the folks who either, go to some of these larger churches or who run these larger churches argue that the rules that have been put in place against them, number one, impede their First Amendment free exercise of religion rights, and number two, unfairly disadvantage religious services and religious locations versus secular locations. Oh, I think I may have found the data I'm looking for here. Let me see if I can get this for you in terms of ballots returned. Okay, so this is... All right, so this was announced yesterday for ballots returned as of Monday. And gosh, they used some tiny writing, but it looks like 385,000 Dem, 212,000 Republican, 317,000 unaffiliated. So that would mean about 42% Dem, about 34% unaffiliated, and about 23% Republican having been turned in so far. Again, look, we're a blue state right now, and I'd be surprised if the numbers didn't look like this here in Colorado. The fight for let me just put it this way, the fight for the presidency is not here in Colorado this year, but the fight for a lot of other things is. And folks need to get out and vote and protect whatever they can, even if people fighting for liberty are going to be swamped by suburban soccer moms who can't see straight due to their disdain for Donald Trump and are just going to vote D for everything. We're not going to be able to change their minds this year, but we got to get out there and fight on all the ballot measures that we can. I don't mean fight literally. I mean get out there with the ballot, mark your ballot, and try to protect what liberty we have left in this state. Anyway, back to this court case. So yesterday, a federal judge named Daniel Domenico, actually the ruling wasn't yesterday, but the article came out yesterday in the Denver Post, ruled a few days earlier, that state officials cannot enforce mask-wearing mandates or certain limits on the number of people who can gather at religious institutions, right? Cannot enforce mask-wearing mandates in church, in synagogue, at the temple, at the mosque, wherever, or certain limits on size. And there were a couple of churches, Denver Bible Church, Wheat Ridge Community Baptist Church in Brighton. They filed a lawsuit in August, and they said that these public health orders violated their First Amendment free exercise of religion rights. And according to the Denver Post story on this, the judge dismissed most of their claims, but granted part of the request, agreeing that they should be exempted from mask-wearing requirements if they interfere with their religious exercise. In other words, you feel like you can't pray adequately, or if you're doing communion, obviously that would be a little difficult. I don't know if churches are even doing that right now with all the COVID stuff. I'm not a church goer, so I don't know. But anything where you feel like having that mask is preventing you from doing what you want or need to do as part of your religious belief, this judge said the government cannot enforce mask wearing requirements in those circumstances. And also, the judge said that the government can't limit the number of people who can be indoors in let's say, a large church. Some of these churches obviously are very, very large, some of these can accommodate thousands of people. The judge says you can't limit the number of people in these churches beyond what a similar limit would be for a secular institution or for something that wasn't a church, right? So he's not saying you can't limit the number of people in a church. He's saying the number of people in a church can't be more limited than the number of people who would be allowed in the same kind of facility for a secular thing. The judge wrote in his 44-page order, the Constitution does not allow the state to tell a congregation how large it can be when comparable secular gatherings are not so limited, or tell a congregation that its reason for wishing to remove facial coverings is less important than a restaurant or spas. Now, I will note other judges have faced these kinds of questions in recent months, and other judges have ruled, I think uniformly, that the state can do what it's doing. I think this is the first ruling that has said the state can't do what it's doing. And for now, Governor Polis and Colorado's Department of Public Health and Environment are appealing the judge's decision, and they are asking that the judge's ruling be stayed, essentially temporarily reversed while the appeal is pending. And, of course, their argument is that if you allow the churches to do these things under the judge's rules, that could result in spread of or a clustered outbreak of coronavirus. And the people who want to go to church will say our First Amendment rights trump any of that. And this is what some higher court will soon have to decide. So we'll see. But I wanted to share that with you. I'm not a religious person. I'm not Christian. I don't go to church. But I think these are really, really interesting questions. And I think that in the United States of America, you better have a truly compelling argument, an absolutely compelling argument, if you are going to attempt to limit any constitutional right. And this is commonly understood provision of constitutional law. If the government is going to infringe on a right, they must do so in the least intrusive way possible in terms of intruding on the right, and they must do it in a way that is narrowly tailored to meeting their goals, and they must have legitimate goals. Now, I do think that reducing the spread of coronavirus is a legitimate goal, is limiting the number of people who can go to a church the narrowest possible, the most closely tailored way they can deal with churches and the spread of COVID there? I don't think so. I'm not expert on this, but I don't think so. The way they've done the limits so far. Anyway, Polis and the state are saying that the court misunderstood a lot of things and they're appealing it, and we'll see what happens. But I wanted to make sure you were aware of that ruling because I believe it's the first of its kind, in Colorado at least. I want to talk about something else now as we're heading into this election. There's been an absolute dearth, that's a good word, isn't it? Like Darth Vader, except with an E in there as well, of what's called ticket splitting throughout the United States of America for at least the last 20 years. The amount of ticket splitting has been on a steady decline for much of my adult lifetime. And I guess I should give a definition for those who don't know what I'm talking about. Ticket splitting. Voting for the candidate of one particular party for president and then voting for a candidate or candidates of other political parties for other races. As an example, voting for a Democrat for president and a Republican for Senate. That's actually an example that I think is going to happen a lot this year. Here's the key, though. If there is a substantial win for Joe Biden, the question of whether or not ticket splitting is going to be a big deal is what's going to decide control of the U.S. Senate next year. And if we have not just a Democratic president, but if we have this Democratic president with this Democratic vice president who are being, well, the vice president is a true radical herself. She doesn't need to be led around by any radicals. By one nonpartisan government-watching group, Kamala Harris, based on her voting record in the U.S. Senate, was the most liberal member of the Senate to the left of Bernie Sanders, if you can imagine such a thing. So she doesn't need to be led around by anyone. She may be doing the leading. And, of course, Joe Biden is allowing Bernie bros and Bernie himself to write a lot of his policies, his radical environmental stuff, just as one example. So we need to have a Republican Senate to slow these people down. Now, if you look at what happened in Colorado in 2018, there was no presidential race, obviously. But voters in Colorado, and again, I frequently pick on suburban women, just simply voted for every Democrat they can find and threw out very, very good, very experienced Republicans that we really needed, like Wayne Williams as Secretary of State, who was widely viewed as arguably the best Secretary of State in America and viewed that way by Democrats and Republicans alike, threw him out and put in Jenna Griswold, who's like some kind of semi-professional dancer with no government experience and no qualifications for the job, and she's proving it now. If Colorado and the rest of the country remain that way, then we're going to have a Democratic Senate giving the Dems anything they want. If there's more ticket splitting, we might be able to get through a Biden presidency. We'll be right back.
This is Denver's Talk Station with Ross Kaminsky now. Tom Martino at 10, 630 KHOW, Denver.